my name's Summer. Welcome to my channel. I am a choice mom to two little girls, Georgia and Autumn, and I'm here today with a good friend of mine, Jessica, and she is also a choice mom. She and I were part of a similar group, the same group, who was all kind of thinking and trying to get pregnant at the same time. Her oldest and my oldest are about like 6 weeks apart. Actually,
Yeah,
her only. She only has, you're one and only.
Yes.
So we were definitely like in the same phases at the same times. But one of the things that differs between us is I had my kids using an anonymous donor and she had her son using a known donor. And a lot of times I get questions about donors and how to pick donors, and I don't even know if a lot of people really understand the ins and outs of using an anonymous donor versus using a known donor, but I wanted to have this conversation today to just give you some ideas. So Jessica, let's talk about it.
All right. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So I actually know that you started out using an anonymous donor. So how did you first start using an anonymous donor and then shift to using a known donor?
Well, when I first started thinking about having a child on my own, I was doing a lot of YouTube research, and I came across a video of Sarah, yes.
Brokaw.
Sarah Brokaw. And there were two things that really stuck with me about her story. And one was that she had used a known donor. And the second that really kind of prompted my trying phase was that she could always adopt. You're only young and fertile once.
Right.
And so adoption was always possible. But if I wanted to have a child of my own, I was going to need to get the train moving. Mm-hmm. So that sort of kick-started the entire process of thinking and trying. And I remember during my YouTube research, I came across a video from California cryobank and picking out donors, and I was like, oh, I am not ready. I am not ready for that at all. It was a little overwhelming. But I decided to move forward in the trying phase using an anonymous bank donor, and really thought that that was the best option for me. But in the back of my head, I always had this idea of using a known donor, and I had sort of assembled a little list. It was a short list of men and friends that I knew that I thought, well, maybe I'll ask them. So I went through 7 IUIs with a bank donor.
And that was all with the same anonymous donor?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was. And it was not happening fast enough for me. And so I got to sort of this end of this period of having 7 IUIs, and I thought, you know what? I'm not happy with my care. IUIs aren't working. Like, I just need a fresh restart on this whole thing. So that's when I made the decision to move forward with IVF. And I thought, what the heck? I'll just have a couple of conversations and see what happens. Like, the worst thing that could happen was these men would say no.
Right.
And so it's kind of like going on dates now.
So did you ask more than one person to be your donor?
I was prepared to.
Okay.
But the first person that I had asked was enthusiastic about it. And I really appreciated his response and the ensuing discussions that happened.
Okay, so one of the things that I hear people talk about when they are considering using a known donor is that in their mind, they think it's going to be cheaper and faster than using an anonymous donor. So in your experience, was that accurate?
So the short answer to that is no, it is not cheaper and it is not faster. I went into it kind of thinking the same thing.
Okay.
So, and my son's donor and I had a number of conversations, And through those conversations is how we landed on having a legal agreement to formalize his role in my son's life, and also to really work through and examine our intentions. So at least from my side, that's what was really valuable in the process of going through the legal process.
Did you use an attorney that had experience drafting those types of legal agreements between, okay, you did.
Yes.
How do you find an attorney who can draft a legal agreement between a woman who's going to use the donation and the known donor?
Yes. So I asked around, I asked some questions, and was referred to someone. They are a practicing family attorney. So my lawyer did adoptions and donor contracts all the time.
Okay.
There are lots of other types of contracts around fertility, whether that's embryo adoption. So there is a lot of experience out there, and I think it's just a matter of sort of knowing what field you want to ask for. And I think that I know some other people who went through the known donor route, and they also started with a family lawyer who didn't do it, but was able to refer to another family lawyer who did. So that's another route to go.
Okay, so could you ballpark how much time or what the cost was for going that route? Because I think people see, like, when you're ready to use a donor and you go on the website for a cryobank and you're kind of looking, and then you might see, especially if you're starting with the IUI route and you need to purchase a number of vials, like a lot of people start out with 5 vials, they could be like $800 a piece. So people are thinking, oh my gosh, that's expensive. And they think like, well, I have this friend over here, and that would be a lot cheaper, that kind of thing. But so can you ballpark, because it's different expenses, right? Like the donation is the free part, but there are other pieces around it that incur costs, right?
Yes.
Costs both in the time that it takes to do it and the cost of the attorneys and etc.
So I break the cost down into kind of 3 groups. So one is the cost of time, which you can't get back.
Yeah.
The second cost would be around the legal agreement, which was significant. Well, it wasn't too bad. And then the third bucket of costs would be around the donation and the process of acquiring the samples, the sperm samples. Yeah. That's what they're called. I think that's kind of funny that they're called samples.
Yes.
So,
like, sample, is there a whole thing? This is just a little bit?
Okay, so those are the 3 buckets of cost that I would put it in. So time, I'm going to ballpark it. It's hard to remember now. It's been like 4 years. I would say time is about 4 to 5 months. Yep. I would say that it took us to kind of work back and forth with lawyers, and he had a lawyer on his end that was also reviewing the paperwork. And the second bucket is around the legal fees. So that was about $1,500 to about $2,000. And ours was really straightforward too. Okay. We both had agreed. We didn't have a lot of reworking on versions or things like that. So once that legal contract was in place, then we proceeded with the third bucket of cost, which was really around collecting the samples, the sperm samples. That's what they're called, and facilitating that. And that was the biggest effort and cost around doing that, just because there were banks involved, and there's a lot of requirements that the banks have in place for this type of donation.
Yes.
So
there's testing, there's time.
Yeah.
Because to my understanding, they test the person. It's very important for the person to be disease-free, to be healthy. Like, they're really ensuring through multiple steps that the person that's providing the donation is providing clean, healthy sample. Because they're also protecting your health, because it is a bodily fluid, and if there is anything that's impure, I'll call it, in this bodily fluid by mixing that with your body, it can very much impact your health. So it's very precise in the testing and the process that you have to go through to ensure that it's okay to use.
Yeah. And I think that took the largest, that took a big bucket of time as well, because it was coordinating with my doctor's office, the sperm bank, the donor, since he didn't live in the same location as where the bank was. There were travel costs associated with that. And then also the types of testing that I wanted done. So I ended up doing genetic testing for myself to make sure I wasn't carriers of anything. And then that was another aspect of negotiation in the testing, was did I want him to have genetic testing as well? But because I wasn't a carrier, my doctor didn't necessarily recommend that he have to go through the genetic testing as well, because there was really a very low risk of genetic disease or
serious
genetic diseases that could be traced. So that took a lot of time and coordination. So I remember at one point I counted out that I was coordinating time and money between the sperm bank lab, the sperm bank corporate headquarters, my doctor, the lab here where I live, and then my donor and myself. And I was like, there are like 6 people, and this is before Zoom conference calls. So I couldn't necessarily get everybody in the room at the same time.
And one of the things that you had told me earlier was, in terms of not starting out with a known donor, was because when you decided that you were ready to try, and because that's a huge emotional hurdle to overcome, right? Like, I don't think that many people just arrive to their decision to try to have a baby on their own, or just like, this is the thing to do, yeah, let's go. Like, it typically entails a large amount of thought and really soul searching. And once you arrive at that decision, like you had said to me earlier, like, you were ready to go and you weren't necessarily ready to then take on the emotional burden of coordinating all these different things that you're talking about. So it sounds like for you that the space in between all the different IUIs and moving to IVF is the space where you kind of stepped back, recalibrated, took a look at, okay, what do I really want? I'm already not exactly succeeding. I'm not getting pregnant doing this route that I have initially chosen, which is the anonymous donor and the IUI. So you really kind of changed your approach, like, okay, I'm gonna do IVF. And then now, because you had a little bit of distance between the emotional decision to actually start trying, that you had more bandwidth to go through this whole process of asking the guy to help you, going, coordinating the legal aspect, and then all this other stuff that you were talking about.
I think it would have been a lot right off the bat to go through the process of the emotional process of deciding to become a choice mom and doing all of these other things,
right?
To facilitate
and this includes the first guy that you asked said yes. Yes. So that's not even
yes.
I mean, like, if he said no and then the next guy said no, like, then it's even multiplying the amount of emotional hurdles that you're going through in this process.
Yeah. Definitely. Well said. Okay. Thank
you.
And
then also because by the time you integrated a known donor, you were doing IVF. When you do IVF, you need much less sample, because they're literally taking one sperm, one egg, doing the in vitro for however many eggs that they retrieve during the retrieval process. So it's not like, if you're doing IUI, you could easily need 6 donations from the person, as opposed to the process that you went through. Because it was IVF, you only needed one, right?
Yeah. Yes.
This is some work. So you identified the person that you wanted to be your donor.
Mm-hmm.
You navigated that legally. You coordinated the physicality of obtaining said sample.
And I never saw it. Really? I never saw it.
I know. I don't think that's what, it goes direct to the doctor, right?
Yes.
Like, dear person, thank you for the shipment.
One thing that I did want to add is I had actually talked with my doctor too, just out of curiosity. I asked her, hey, do you facilitate this often? And she was like, oh yeah, all the time. And that sort of surprised me because I felt very alone in discovering each step of the process that needed to happen. I didn't find anyone who had done it the same way that I did okay, these are the steps that I take, this is how it works.
Yeah.
And so it was surprising to me when the doctor was like, yeah, happens all the time.
Right.
And I was like,
but I do want to add that I know that it's done all the time, but I hear a lot of people trying to skirt the rules. So I know people who they claim to be a couple. Because if the man is not your partner, and it doesn't have to be married, it could be boyfriend or whatever. If there's a different set of regulations that you have to go through if you are in a relationship versus if this person is not in a relationship. But that's really important because it has to do with the legal obligations of the donor to your child. And I feel like you really did a thorough and methodical approach that you really protected both yourself as a choice mom, because Jessica doesn't want to have issues down the road if somebody changes their mind or wants to be involved. Like, she has thoroughly protected herself and her son from the donor changing his mind and trying to insert himself in some manner in the situation, or in the event that he would try to do that. And when people try to go around the rules and the regulations, they really leave themselves open to having to navigate legal challenges down the road when it comes to custody. But it also could just be an emotional situation that another layer that you would have to navigate. And I think that the point of going through all of this is just so that you can be your choice mom, have your baby, and kind of like you guys are the family unit. And the idea is not necessarily to have this other person be like this appendage to the family unit, so that the more clear you can set the boundaries, I think the better.
Yes. And I will have to say that my feelings about, or I shouldn't, my feelings about what I wanted out of a known donor definitely have evolved from asking him and then through raising a little boy.
How so? That's juicy. Tell us about it.
Well, I would say at the beginning of the process, like when I wanted to use a known donor, I was much more like, okay, it would be nice to be able to say, okay, this is your donor when my son's grown up.
Okay.
Right? And now I'm kind of feel like that would be it's not as important to me anymore.
Okay.
And so
I think that is very common. The set of expectations that you start out with as somebody who's choosing to be a choice mom, things will change. Things will change in ways that you hadn't expected. And what is super important to you when you start out with, as you're navigating, I mean, we have 3-year-olds now. You're up to here in just raising your child and just trying to
sleep.
Yeah, trying to sleep, trying to get them to be decent humans, to wipe their own heinies. And you just,
yes,
some of the concerns that you have going in just really fade away. differently.
Yes, they do. I think that's a great way of saying it, of that set of expectations have evolved.
Yeah.
And going through the legal process was a big part of them evolving. And then just having a child, that has evolved them as well.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have done it any other way because I've got my little boy out of it. I think that if I had used a bank donor, it would be just as great as it is now. So it took a long time, but it's fabulous. It's great. I love my little boy. It was well worth all of it.
Aww. So what advice, if any, do you have for people out there who are weighing out using an anonymous donor versus going down the known donor route? What advice do you have?
My advice would be to ask yourself the 5 whys. And you may or may not have heard of that, but really examine yourself deeply on why are you going down the known donor route. And it's a series of questions you ask yourself. Why? You make a statement, you say why, you answer the question, and then examine why that is. You kind of go through these 5 stages of why to really uncover your reason behind using it.
Have you seen other people use a known donor and have it entail challenges that you did not want to address?
Yes.
Okay, what were those? Tell me about that.
Well, this is sort of anecdotal, but where
she's trying not to divulge identifying information.
So I want to talk a little bit more about cost.
Okay.
Because I think that was a big question on my mind, was sort of like what to expect when you're going through this.
Okay.
So I'm gonna shout out a figure.
Okay.
$8,000. And if it doesn't cost that much, you'll be grateful and you can spend it on your baby.
Right.
Putting that number out there, I do so just to give you a ballpark on what to expect. That doesn't really encompass the time aspect of it.
Right.
But depending on the type of care that you're getting, the route you're going through getting pregnant, there's a lot of variables that could happen through your journey, and that's just sort of a ballpark figure out there.
Hey!
Hi,